Hi. We're going to get started. So our speaker today, Judge Mark Ireland, is a Minnesota District Court judge in the 2nd Judicial District of Ramsey County. Prior to becoming a judge, he was Assistant Attorney General for the state of Minnesota, prosecuting consumer fraud matters. He was also the founder and supervising attorney at the Foreclosure Relief Law Project, which helped families facing foreclosure and communities affected by the foreclosure crisis. Judge Ireland is currently the primary judge for all treatment courts in Ramsey County, which includes adult substance abuse courts, also known as drug courts, veterans treatment courts, DWI courts, and mental health court. He also handles general criminal matters and previously served as the lead child protection judge in the 2nd Judicial District. While all of that is wonderful, I also have to add a personal note. He's the best neighbor you could ever ask for. He's personally responsible for teaching me how to properly draw an ant using sidewalk chalk, which is a really important thing. Please help me welcome Judge Ireland.
All right, so I'm a wanderer, so my understanding is that there's a webcam here, which this is my most flattering view right here. Just the double chin. So first of all, thank you all for coming. My name is Mark Ireland. As Elvira said, that I am a judge here in the 2nd Judicial District in Ramsey County. I've been a judge now for 7-8 years, which is hard to believe, right? Because I'm only 16 years old. But for 7 to 8 years now, and I think one of the most rewarding things that I have been able to do is to work on our treatment courts. I'm sure it's been in the news. There have been stories on it on public radio, deep profiles in terms of what drug courts are, what treatment courts are in the United States. There are good treatment courts, as you'll find out, and there are also bad treatment courts, quite frankly, where there are courts out there that refer to themselves as treatment courts or drug courts, and really they're just kind of the individual playthings of a judge, right? Where the judge doesn't really follow the rules and they put people in jail for minor things and don't follow the best practices that we'll talk about. So before we begin, this is my mantra for life, that I find my life is a lot easier the lower I keep everyone's expectations. All things can be derived from Calvin and Hobbes, I believe, and this one I hold very, very dear. So please, if you're looking for all answers related to drug courts or treatment courts, I'm probably going to fall short. But if you are here for our learning objectives, which is to know the goal of treatment courts and how they benefit all of us, including the mentally ill and the chemically dependent, you're in the right place. I think I can hit that and check that box. If you are here to understand the difference between the treatment court model and the traditional correctional approach, you're in the right place. I think I can show you that. And then finally, to know the 3 ways that treatment courts are more effective in assisting people with mental health and chemical dependency issues. So those are the learning objectives. That's the why we're here. That's the so what. It also, my understanding is that you'll get CLE credits, which may be the primary motivator as to why you're here, but that's okay. I'll work with that. And that's also a mantra of treatment court. We meet you where you're at. And if you're here just for the credit, God bless you. Hopefully we'll meet your needs, get your credits, and then also you'll learn a little bit about the treatment courts. So the goal of the treatment courts is really rooted in this, is that although only 5% of the world's population lives in the United States, it is home to 25% of the world's prison population. So not only does the current overpopulated, underfunded system hurt those incarcerated, it also digs deeper into the pockets of tax-paying Americans. Who said this crazy liberal thing? Oh, Rand Paul. That's right. So, I think that treatment courts are one of those things that really cross the partisan divide, and there's a lot of bipartisan support for treatment courts, which makes it a really enjoyable project to work on. In that when it goes up to Congress, when it goes up to the state legislature, you have people who are both Republicans and Democrats all across the political spectrum, recognize the need for treatment courts and to do things differently. Sometimes they want it just from the sheer humanity of it, and introducing just a human emotional gift where you're recognizing that everybody who walks into the treatment court or into court is a person of value, and they have value. They're somebody's mom or daughter or sister or brother or cousin, and virtually everybody I think in this room probably either is a relative of, knows somebody, or they themselves have a history of chemical abuse or mental health, serious mental health issues. So it's something that affects virtually everybody in the country. And so the goal of treatment courts are simple: to stop the incarceration of people who have committed crimes primarily due to their mental illness and chemical dependency. Now, notice in that what is not there. What is not there is anything related to low-level offenders, right? What is not there is something about low-risk offenders or things like that, or people who've made one mistake in their life. That's not what treatment courts are about. Because if you talk about the debate and the conversations about mass incarceration in this country, if I was to suddenly legalize every drug, regardless, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, everything, if I was to legalize it all and set all those people free, and then I was to set all the people in the United States who are incarcerated for non-violent offenses, we would still, per capita, be the most incarcerated country in the whole world. That's stunning to me, right? And I think it puts, and so it does speak to me as to how we do need to do things differently. And as it relates to treatment courts, which we'll get to in a minute, these are courts for people who are high risk, high need. If you're a college student and you're caught with a bag of weed in your glove compartment, treatment courts are not for you. That is not the purpose of this treatment. That's not the purpose of treatment courts. That's not what they're there for. That is what treatment courts throughout the country who are not following best practices, they target low-level offenders. Those are people who should be in diversion. Those are people who shouldn't even enter into the criminal justice system at all. But this is for people who, absent the treatment courts, they would go to prison. We know that. We know that absent the support and the structure of treatment courts, these folks, whether they are a commit to prison under the sentencing guidelines or they're a stay of execution under the Minnesota guidelines, everybody in that courtroom knows that 6 months down the road, they're going to be there on a probation violation for failing to do their chemical health evaluation, failing to follow through on their chemical health evaluation treatment recommendation, not showing up for their UAs to establish whether or not they're sober or not staying in contact with their probation officer, not doing the basic things. And then they get a probation violation, then they come into the system, then they come into prison. So again, these are treatment courts. They are designed for high-risk, high-need people who commit to their crime primarily due to their mental illness or chemical dependency. So again, what's going on? I think this is basically it. I saw a really good graph about, I would say like a month ago, by a professor up in Duluth who charted the deinstitutionalization, which is largely a good thing, right, of the mentally ill and chemically dependent, with the increase in the incarceration population in the United States. And so we often see that very high percentage of individuals in our jails suffer from mental illness and chemical dependency, and the largest providers of mental health care and chemical dependency treatment in the country are our prisons and are our jails. So again, rates of serious mental illness among individuals in jail is 3 to 4 times higher than the general population. So now we'll get to the difference between treatment courts and traditional court responses. Y'all didn't think that you were just going to sit there today, right? So does anybody have any thoughts? Throw them out there, no wrong answers, as to what a difference, just based on sort of what I said, what you've heard, on the news, or maybe you watched the heroin documentary on Netflix. I don't know. Yes. Yeah. So the response was, and see if I captured you right, is that treatment courts are more interested in rehabilitation as opposed to punishment or locking somebody up. And that's right. That's one of the things. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Treatment courts might tailor the consequences of rewards to the individual in treatment courts.
Right. So the response for folks who, I think there are a bunch of people on the phone right now listening in. So the statement was that treatment courts are more individualized. So the traditional courts, it's kind of a, for lack of a better word, a factory, where this is the response that you give to X, Y, and Z response, X, Y, and Z conduct, and the treatment courts have a little bit more flexibility to have more creative responses. Anything else? Yes. Collaborative versus adversarial. Yes, yes. Those are all right. Those are all correct. So you can see, maybe you read my PowerPoint. So as it relates to the next slide, so again, treatment court in Ramsey County is voluntary. It is a voluntary program. And what I often say when people are coming in, because we have in Ramsey County, we require them to observe treatment court at least 3 times. Usually they have to observe 5 times. They have to come back every single week, 3 weeks in a row, to observe what treatment courts are. And what I say is, I ain't selling steak knives here. You know, I'm not here to trick you into treatment. I'm not here to trick you into treatment court. I want you to know that what you're getting into when you sign up to do a treatment court, because it is intensive. It is comprehensive, it is collaborative. We talk about your life, your housing, your employment, your education, your substance issues. And oftentimes, as you can see by the length of participation, 1 to 3 years, I would say it's more 2 to 3 years, honestly, that they're signing up for a long road in treatment court compared to the traditional court. And you can see, I think the other aspect of it, and we'll get to it. So again, the traditional courts focus on punishment and compliance with conditions of probation. Treatment courts focus on recovery and habilitation. You notice I didn't use the word rehabilitation, and that is because we're working with high-risk, high-need people who oftentimes have never been habilitated in the first place, so we can't rehabilitate someone who's never experienced normalcy. I was having a conversation, and when you do this in treatment courts a lot, every time I have a treatment court session, we talk to each participant, the judge, and the participant for at least 3 minutes, sometimes longer, one-on-one about what they're doing, what they did the last week, what they're doing, what they're going to do the coming week, what they've been doing right, what they've been doing maybe having a challenge with. And so it was around the holidays, and I asked this guy, he's probably 28, 29 years old, and I said, you know, we got Christmas coming up. That can be a really tough time for people who are in recovery and trying to be sober. Lots of parties, lots of family get-togethers, lots of stress that associated with that. How are you going to handle that? And he kind of talked a little bit about that. And then I said, well, what are you looking forward to? And he said, being there. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I've been in jail or in prison every Christmas for the past 9 years. Now, he didn't have a 9-year prison sentence, but he had just been cycling in and out of the system, bopping from one jail to another, doing life on the installment plan for 9 years, right? And so this was going to be the first Christmas that he was actually going to spend with his family. And so then we got talking, and then I said, well, when was the last time you were sober? He's in his late 20s. When was the last time you were sober for Christmas? He's at 13 years old. that's the population that we work with in treatment courts. And so, and those are the people that we try and help and kind of change their lives. Because you know exactly what's going to happen if he was to go into the traditional court system, because he has been in the traditional court system and he's been on probation a lot. And probably the probation officer oftentimes is the person that they have the longest, steadiest relationship with in their life. But here you have that opportunity to give not only that individual a glimpse of what normalcy is, or what I think normalcy is, but also to reconnect to their family and their loved ones and start rebuilding that trust. Yeah.
I wonder if people who are incarcerated with this, and a lot of times they finish on big children, so those courts versus like what was natural. So how do you decide?
Yeah. Every court is different, and there are lots of treatment courts throughout the state, so everyone's different. So I can only speak to us in Ramsey County. We have drug court, DWI court, mental health court, and veterans treatment court. And each of them have a little bit different population, and each of them have a little bit different criteria. All of them focus on high risk, high need. So, so if somebody is in prison and they, for example, don't have a significant chemical use issue, or so they're an abuser of drugs and alcohol, but they are not an addict. And that's the distinction there is that an abuser of drugs and alcohol, if the stakes are high enough, they can stop. If the consequences are high enough, they can stop. Maybe because of circumstances they've never stopped, because whether that's like all their friends and family are doing it, so they do it, but they are not necessarily addicted. They are abusers. So we try and focus on the people who are addicts, that they cannot, no matter what consequences is out there, they can't. And it's a fine line to figure that out. Yeah, that's right. So we try and stay in our lanes, and so people will be referred, and there's a chemical health assessment done. There's also some nationally verified studies related to the high risk, high need. And so that's the other. So it's those two things in tandem. And so that's one aspect. The other is if somebody, is in prison for murder. We don't accept murderers in our court. And there can be debate about that as to why that is. But, it's a collaborative process where you're balancing public safety and rehabilitation. And so there are certain person crimes that aren't allowed into at least the treatment courts in Ramsey County, partly because there's a feeling by the county attorney, the prosecutor, that the risk is too high to the public. And if while in treatment court, because again, we're trying to rehabilitate or habilitate, not lock people up, that if that individual was to commit a crime, it could, while in the treatment court, it could bring the whole program down, that the public would lose faith in the program. What's that? Yes. Yeah, so there's no wrong door. So judges refer, prosecutors refer, defense counsel refer, family members. Sometimes we got a mom who calls up and says, my son is in jail. I think he fits this program. Can you send somebody to talk to him? And so we'll do that. And there's no wrong door. So we get people who are right out of the gate, they just got arrested, and so they're referred. We have people who are on a probation violation, and so they're at their probation violation hearing, and so they've tried traditional probation. and so they're referred at that point. So we try and be as open as we can. Yeah. All right, so 3 ways treatment courts are more effective, this is my opinion, more effective than a traditional court system. Number 1 is a motivation to change and tapping into the individual motivation to change and empowering people to change their lives. Number 2 is we do have an integrated approach, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we have around the table before each court session, we staff each case, so we sit around a conference table for several hours before we go into court. And there's a defense counsel there, there's a prosecutor there, there's the probation officer there, there is a representative from treatment there. Sometimes there are several representatives from treatment there, as well as the judge. And we talk about each individual and how their week went, what the judge should talk to them about, and then decide if they missed a UA, if they missed an office visit, what is our response going to be. And then we focus on, particularly for drug court, evidence-based practices. So 25 years ago, first drug court started in Florida, and then it started to expand. And I gotta admit that some of those first drug courts were a disaster. They did not work at all. They were well-intentioned. They're very well-intentioned, but some of the things that they were doing didn't work. And one of them, frankly, was sort of a scared straight model where, like, you slip up one time, then you're going to jail for however many days. And now, over the past 25 years, there have been study after study after study to kind of verify what are the best practices that have been published, and they've combined studies that have been done to try and really suss out what are the individual practices of effective treatment courts. Talking to individual defendants one-on-one for at least 3 minutes, that's something that has been verified through different studies by comparing courts where that doesn't happen. Having participants come to court at least once every 2 weeks at the beginning of the program has been verified to be more successful. The caseloads, the graduated sanctions, all of those things have been verified by different studies that have gone on. So what does this look like? So do we have a volunteer? Elvira, you want to be sentenced? Okay. So traditional sentencing, right, is, I say, Ms. Emser-Herbert, you pled guilty to a misdemeanor. Is that true?
Yes.
And you're ready to be sentenced here today? All right, so that'll be 90 days on Ramsey County Correctional Facility. We'll stay the execution of that sentence for 1 year on the condition that you be on probation to probation. You get a chemical health evaluation. Okay, I waive the chemical health evaluation fee because I find you can't pay that. In order to follow the terms and recommendations of that chemical health evaluation, abstain from drugs and alcohol, including blood, breath, urine test, remaining law-abiding, no same or similar incidents. Follow the general terms and conditions of probation, $50 fine since you're represented by the public defender. I waive the $75 public defender fee, court costs and fees. Have a great afternoon, Ms. Emser, okay? All right, thank you. I do that about 30 times a day. I did that about 20 times this morning. And so obviously the treatment court model, then you're on your way, right? Probation, your probation's issue right now, right? And that's kind of the sentence down the road. And maybe the felonies are a little bit more elaborate, but not a whole lot more. And so with a treatment court model, I'd say, Ms. Emser-Herbert, I heard you've been struggling a little bit. Is that true? Yeah. So you missed a UA. So why is that? Why'd you miss a UA?
Well, I was supposed to be on a stick, and I couldn't have my
all right. And obviously you understand that kids get sick sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so especially if your kid gets sick a lot, obviously UAs are important. They're critical of this program, right? We need to catch you being sober, right? And so we've got to figure out a way for you to get the support that you need. So have you talked to anybody else in treatment court about maybe being able to come over and watch your kid while you go do your UA? All right. And have you talked to your probation officer, kind of problem solve, like what happens in this situation? All right. Can you do that for me? Yeah. So how about you write a paper, and next time we come to court, you can just kind of jot down some notes. We don't need a thesis or anything like that. But why don't next time in court, why don't you kind of give a little presentation, because I think there are other people in this treatment court who've kind of been going through that same issue of, we call it life, right? Where you got an appointment or something that's really important, but then an emergency rises up, right? But sometimes those emergencies are just things that you know are going to happen because you know your kid's going to get sick, right? So do you need a bus pass or anything to help you get transportation? Okay. So obviously, because we didn't verify that you're sober, you lose your verified sober date. Obviously, you have your personal sober date. You need to go do a UA this afternoon. And then you need to prepare that paper and work on that little report for next week when you come see me, okay? All right. All right. So that's what we do all day, right? We have those conversations with individuals, trying to meet them where they're at, trying to educate them as to how to go forward. And obviously the paper is a sanction, right? And obviously going and meeting with the probation officer is not something they want to do, but they do it, right? But we also have our supports there as well. Now, if there's a suspicion that it wasn't the kid who was sick, let's say that there were multiple UAs missed, and Elvira didn't return the phone call of the probation officer when they called and said, go do a UA. So it was out of contact. So red flags are going up that they actually had relapsed. Then we would order them to get an updated chemical health evaluation. If they keep doing it, then all of a sudden, then the sanctions get more. Then they might have to do community work service, or they might have to do sentence to serve, or they might have to do a night in jail or a day in jail. But that's like way down the road. So in a traditional correctional setting, they may say, you missed your UA or you missed 5 UAs, that's a probation violation. We're going to do a 15-day jail consequence, and that's going to be it. In treatment courts, if we are going to put somebody in jail for more than 6 days, we might as well terminate them, because everybody knows that if you're in jail for more than 6 days, you're probably going to lose your job, you're probably going to lose your housing. All that stuff that we built up and we worked on kind of goes away. And so it's a last resort to do a jail consequence. Yes? No, that's a good question. So the question was, do we have night court? God, I love Harry Anderson. I love that show. So I want to be a judge. He's passed away recently. So one of the conversations that we have with people before they come in is to understand the time, because at the beginning of the program, it is we have some folks who work, but it is a very time-consuming program. But again, because we are high risk, high need, very, very few people who come into our court are full-time employed, right? So we had a recent graduate in our Veterans Court. He was sleeping in a tent for 12 years until he came into Veterans Treatment Court. And now he lives in the higher ground and has an apartment, and he is so proud of this apartment. I mean, he keeps it like immaculate and is always constantly cleaning the apartment, making sure that it's perfect. But when he came into the court, so obviously, you know, him getting a job or working full time or something like that, that was not the priority of the court. There are some folks who have jobs. Usually they work in Eastside Pizzeria, employs a lot of our our folks because the owner of Eastside Pizzeria is in recovery. And so he understands, you know, if you've got a UA or you've got court, he is very conducive to allowing them to kind of schedule around it. And so there are a number of employers who will do that. But again, because we're high risk, high need, if you're coming in here and you're a senior vice president of 3M and you have, you know, insurance and you've got like 50 family members that are sitting there in courtroom supporting you, treatment course probably not for you. Not to say that the senior executive at 3M is an addict. They very well could be, but do they need the treatment court, or do they have the other outside supports that could help them? Okay. Yeah.
The question is, how many people are currently participating in Ramsey County Treatment Courts? Is there a maximum number of participants allowed, or is it an open-ended number?
Yeah. So there are approximately 150 participants in our program right now. There are probably approximately 30 to 40 people across our courts that are observing or at some phase of the observation. So again, the question was, how many people are in Ramsey County Treatment Courts right now? Those are our numbers. I would say we are always hesitant to say, no, we can't take any more. Because as soon as we do that and referrals stop, then, you know, our numbers stop. I will say that our adult substance abuse court, our drug court, is packed. I think there were today's Wednesday, right? Tuesday? What day is Tuesday? It's Tuesday. So on Thursday, I mean, there will be 80 people. For adult substance abuse court. That is really, really hard to do what we need to do and to have fidelity to the treatment court model when you've got that number of people. And so we've just had lots of conversations just this week and over the weeks about, well, how do we do this? Because, you know, when you start working with treatment courts, I mean, and knowing the numbers, it's not just people who are getting possessions of drugs, you know, I mean, virtually every motor vehicle theft felony that I see is likely a drug or methamphetamine or heroin. So there has not been any breaks. I think that we're working on some sort of objective criteria that's not try to mitigate against any sort of implicit bias or racial bias or to try and, while we've got so many people in drug court, to keep the doors open, but maybe we have to limit some. All right. So again, this is in Ramsey County, we have our problem-solving court unit, mental health court, DWI court, veterans court, and adult substance abuse court. This is a little overview of the types of cases that they have. I have to say that the trend for all of these courts is towards felony level crimes. We talked a little bit earlier about that problem-solving court or treatment court team. And so again, we've got the judge and the coordinator, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, the case manager, treatment representatives, other members of the team, as well as law enforcement. Yes? How do we pay for that? That's a good question. Well, to get started with, we had federal grants to get started. And then last year, we kept talking about sustainability and how we sustain our treatment courts. And at the county level, we had a steering committee, which was phenomenal. And we kind of set forth our principles because all of these actors agree that treatment courts work, and they also agree that treatment courts overall save money. On the probation side, I think that there was a little bit of a myth about how much it costs to supervise treatment court people versus regular folks on probation. But when we are high risk, high need individuals in treatment courts, it's actually not that much higher than the amount that they spend on high-risk, high-need people on general probation. It's a little bit more, but it's not significantly more. And so the commitment that was made is that everybody pays for themselves. So if you're committed to treatment court, that means, and you're the county attorney, and this is a program that you believe in and that you want, that means that you are going to make sure that that position is within your framework. And when your budget goes to the Ramsey County Board, you're advocating to have the treatment court as part of your budget. Same with probation. They committed to having four probation officers for treatment courts. And like I said, 150 caseload, I mean, that's a pretty healthy caseload for four. Our pre-release, same with the judges, we pay for our court side of things. And so where you get in danger, I think is, and where I think a lot of treatment courts get in danger, and we were there as well, is when you come in and you say, hey, I want to do a treatment court. They're awesome. They save money. Let's do it. And here's $300,000 or $500,000 from the Department of Justice grant to get this started. And really, there haven't been the conversations to say, well, what happens in 3-5 years when that grant runs out, which inevitably it does. And if you don't have the folks involved, committed to say, yeah, we're going to pay for this once the grant goes out, then obviously it has to shut down. It is true that some of the costs that are saved are not saved by the county. They're saved by the State Department of Corrections, right? And so you have people inputting money into a program that ultimately saves other people in the silo that are in a different silo money. But I did do, and we have done some research related to the felony cases and things like that, that have shown that even the jail time that typically these folks would incur, even if it's a felony level offense where prison is the ultimate place where they may end up, that ultimately it takes 2-3 steps of doing a jail consequence or an interim jail consequence of 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or 180 days. And those days add up. I mean, those are, you know, $200, $300 a night, right? And that's county money that's being spent. And so ultimately, I think the cost savings, people understand the cost savings down the line. So prior to staffing, again, we talked about that meeting. Participants will meet with their case manager and their probation officer. They'll attend their treatment programming, submit to random UAs. Our participants at the beginning of the program, if they have a mental health court is a little different, but will submit to a random UA at least twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. And that's a lot. And the UAs that are done have look back periods as well. And so if somebody drank on a Saturday and they get a UA on Sunday, even if they blew a 0, that UA would show, it would have metabolized alcohol in their system. And so you would know that they had drank. Case managers, and then obviously urgent updates and things to the team via email. And then this is our staffing sheet. And if you can see here, there's a little thing called fishbowl and medallion, because it's not all about sanctions. So it's not all about like how do we want to have the kind of like good parenting, right? We want to have the intensity level of the praise at the same intensity level as the sanction, right? Because otherwise people, in order to get attention or whatever, they would just either focus on that negative response from the court. And so this is, obviously there are different kinds of incentives and things that we use. You can see our clapping hands vigorously. Sometimes treatment courts are called clapping courts because as you walk by or you'll hear people clap. So Elvira made all of her UAs. Let's give her a big round of applause. Look at that smile. See, people love it. You will love to be clapped. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't cost any money, but it is so important. And when you're talking about people who are at probably the worst place they've ever been in their life, and they're struggling, right? And being sober, and they realize that maybe being sober doesn't necessarily mean all problems go away, right? Dysfunctional families still exist, even though you're sober. You know, getting a job and holding a job still exists, regardless of whether or not you're sober. Having a little praise, having people supporting you through that and transitioning is important. We do gift cards at times. We do, sometimes they have fees waived or reduced as part. Sometimes they get to leave court early, which I think is probably, of all the things, if you say you want $50, you want to leave court early, they would probably choose leave court early. So it's really, really popular. And then we have, for everybody who's done everything that they were supposed to do, we have a fishbowl, and their name gets in the fishbowl for a prize that week. And it actually looks like a fish. It's a glass bowl that actually looks like a fish. And so, because studies have shown against those evidence-based practices that having the chance to win can be just as big or close as equivalent as actually winning the actual prize in terms of an incentive. So in terms of sanctions, we kind of touched on this with our example that sometimes it's that paper that's in the corner there that they have to write, or they maybe have to present to court. Sometimes they have to volunteer or do a certain level of community service. Sometimes they might be a jail sanction. Sometimes they may have to pay a fine. It's individualized. It depends on the particular situation. The rule is show up, be honest, and try. If you show up and you be honest and you try, you're generally good, right? So like if somebody at the beginning of court in phase 1, right, they're just out of the chute, and they show up to their UA, and their UA is positive, I'm not going to put them in jail, right? I want them to show up. I want them to know that this is a different program. This is not regular court. You are not going to be punished for use. If you do but if you skip your UA or you miss your UA, you're not showing up. A little bit different if they're not capable of showing up. That's a distinction. But if they choose not to show up, or they dilute their UA by drinking massive amounts of water so that they have a UA of nothing, then there may be then that may be sanctionable. Or if they use sometimes and they absolutely lie about why it is positive. So I've had people who showed up and they was positive for UA, and she said, well, I was at home and I smoked in my apartment and I used a lot of Febreze. I Febrezed the S out of it, she said in court. And that's why her UA was positive for, I think it was heroin. Obviously, I don't think I'm not a toxicologist, but I don't think that's true, right? And so in that situation, even though she showed up to the UA, she may get a sanction for, in that particular situation, there was a heck of a lot more going on, that not just the Febreze incident. But obviously she's going to get sanctioned. Even though she showed up, she wasn't being honest about what was going on. And we can't treat people who are not honest, because you can't get the level of care. It's like somebody going into the doctor and saying, they've broken their arm, and they say, well, my elbow's a little sore. Do you have a recommendation for a sore elbow, when really the bone is broken? Right, the doctor can't provide the right level of service. So those are the keys. And then obviously those goalposts shift. What is expected, show up, be honest, and try, is different in phase 1 than when you've been in the program for a year or 2 years. The expectations are higher for the individuals. So we progress through the phases. So there's an observation phase that we talked about. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and graduation. We were actually added another phase in there because I've noticed in this past year that people kind of get stalled out in phase 3, so we kind of broke that one up in half. And then as you move through the phases, you'll start going to court less. You'll start meeting with your probation officer less. You'll have more of an opportunity to have a full-time job and have more freedom, right? Because we don't want, and sometimes I have a problem with this, I think the team has a problem with that, we don't want like great treatment court participants, right? We want people who walk out that door at graduation, they never come back into the courthouse unless to say hello or to pick up their 5-year or their 6-year sobriety medallion. That's what our goal is. And so we don't want to keep somebody in the program who has gotten everything that they need to get out of the program. So does it work? So again, we reduce crime and save lives. Nifty slogan. So the best treatment courts through the studies have reduced crime by as much as 45% or recidivism 45% over other dispositions. We've studied our courts and graduates from Ramsey County Treatment Courts have a 12 to 16% recidivism rate compared to over 50% for high-risk, high-need offenders in general. So 12 to 16% recidivism rate, that's after 3 years of graduating, have they committed another crime. Our treatment courts have been around for 15 years, so we've got a pretty large pool of data. And so then you might be saying, haha, those are just the people who have graduated. What about all the people who fail? Because we do have people who do not graduate our program, they fail out. And of those individuals, they have between a 35 and 45% recidivism rate. So still a reduction of arguably between 5 and 15%. I mean, these are all depending on level of offenses and things like that. There's lots of nuances when you talk about recidivism rates, but between a 5 to 15% recidivism rate of people who were terminated from our program for whatever reason. And I thought a lot about that because obviously they didn't graduate. And the only thing that I conclude is that when they are in this program, they are connected to community services. They learn how to get a chemical health evaluation. They learn where different treatment providers are in the community. And they also interact and they see other people who are successful. And so I like to believe, I don't know if this is true or not, but I like to believe that some of that rubs off, that maybe it wasn't right time for them for whatever reason. Maybe they were too young and their prefrontal cortex hadn't fully developed, which in men at least doesn't fully develop till they're 25. I know that's true in my case. And so maybe it just wasn't like the right time for them to make these big dramatic changes in their life. But then down the road, they decide it is. And now they know and they've seen how other people do it. So economic benefits, $2 to $27 for $1 invested. 3,000 to 13,000 per drug court participant. Example from one of our courts, we had a drug court participant. She was a 9-year commit to prison. 9-year commit to prison. I think I did the back of the napkin confirmation. I think she spent a total of 30 days in jail for us, largely at the very beginning. And so when she graduated, that was about $500,000 in incarceration costs that the state of Minnesota saved by not sending her to prison. She reconnected with her family. She works down at the Chili's down by Rosedale Mall. You know, does she have like a perfect life? No, she doesn't. But does she have a life that's filled with friends? She's really involved in the sober community in Minnesota. Again, she's reconnected with her family. She's got a job. She's paying taxes. She's got an apartment. That's a win. That's a success. That's a success. And so again, those are the studies from our courts. Veterans Treatment Court is not up there because it's relatively new. Veterans Treatment Court in Ramsey County started about 3 to 4 years ago, and so we have too few of graduates to like really give a good sample of statistics. Adult Substance Abuse Court and DWI Court are the ones that have been around the longest, and you can see we have our graduates, the new charges within a year is 5% and 6%, and then when you expand that out to 2-5 years, that's when it starts to go up, which is on the other slide. Again, just to recap, our learning objectives were to know the goal of treatment courts and how they benefit all of us, including the mentally ill and chemically dependent. So we talked about that, right? Understand the difference between the treatment court model and the traditional correctional approach. So we talked about that. And then know the 3 ways that treatment courts are more effective in assisting people with mental health and chemical dependency. We talked about that. So I think, again, this is it. This is what we need to do. And so we really do need to address persons with mental health issues and chemical health issues in our correctional system. Figure out a different way to do things than how we have done it in the past, and advocate for those. Because I think everybody in this room, you got a lot of power to help us out and to do things differently. I mean, we talk about racial disparities in our criminal justice system. We talk about over-incarceration in our justice system. This is not the solution, but this is one of the solutions that need to be implemented if we're actually serious about those things. That's it. Do we have any questions? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm the primary judge, and so I do treatment courts, I would say 80% of the time. And so I'd say out of an 8-week rotation, that's the life cycle of like a butterfly, and as well as me. So of an 8-week from a caterpillar to a butterfly. So of the 8-week rotation, 6 of those I will do treatment courts each day. Monday, mental health court; Tuesday, DWI court; Wednesday, veterans treatment court; Thursday, adult substance abuse court; and then Friday, I generally do have a criminal calendar, but I try and do the administrative stuff related to the courts. And then there are 2 other judges who are also on the rotation, and for the 2 of those 8 weeks that I'm not on the bench, they are doing treatment courts. So there's an incoming judge and an outgoing judge. And so in September, I'll be the outgoing judge, so I'll be doing it 1 week out of the 8 weeks, and there'll be a new primary judge and a new incoming judge, and so it'll rotate that way. And obviously that's in an ideal world. People go on vacation or people are at conferences and things like that, so sometimes I'm on more and sometimes I'm on less, but yeah, it's a 80%, 90% of what I do. It is voluntary. It's one of the only. This is a good question. So in Ramsey County and Hennepin County, I think we're the only 2 counties in the state or judicial districts in the state where judges have like rotations or assignments where you're on criminal or you're on family and then you rotate off, even though we do everything. And so this treatment courts is the one assignment in Ramsey County where the chief judge, as by decision of the bench, can't force somebody to do, for obvious reasons, right? You can see if somebody does not like, does not believe in treatment, it does not believe in the model or whatever, it's going to be a disaster. Obviously, all the judges kind of have their own different personalities when they talk to people and their own thing, so it's going to be different. But bottom line is that at a minimum, the judge has to want to do it because it is an investment. You get to know all the participants really well. It's tragic when they relapse and disappear. I mean, somebody who you've seen like every week for like a year or a year and a half, and then all of a sudden they're gone and you have no idea like where they are, and then all of a sudden they kind of reemerge in 6 months or whatever, and they picked up 8 new charges throughout the state of Minnesota. Just like, you know, and so that's obviously difficult. But it's also really rewarding when you see people who have just turned a corner. Yeah.
If somebody is in the process of making a marriage, I think this would be important that these people have the program.
Yeah, so the question is for people on the teleconference was, does the treatment court interact with like the CHIPS, the child protection matter? There's not really a formal agreement. There are, like at the national conference, there are, they call them family dependency courts. And so they use the treatment court model in a child protection case, which I think would be really effective. But there are a number of people who are in our courts that are also doing the child protection cases, and the social workers and things are aware of what they're doing, and we have them sign releases of information, so we forward, you know, if they're clean and sober for 8 months and things like that, that we can communicate that information to their social worker, or that they're not doing multiple UAs for multiple people at the same time, try and coordinate that. But that is an independent process, and so try and respect that. But we are developing information, and what I tell them is that, you know, we've had multiple women who are pregnant who come into the court, and I say, you know, I was a child protection judge, you know, for 4 years. I did this, and I can tell you that if you give birth to that child and that child has heroin or methamphetamine in their system, child protection is going to, you are not going to bring that child home from the hospital. And so that is just, they're going to do a blood test there, and they're going to call child protection, and you're very 99.9%, you are not going to take that child home. But if you are part of this court and you are working this program, and that child is born not with those drugs in its system, there's a very good chance that you get to bring that child home. And then we hook them up with Mothers First, which is a great Ramsey County program that works with at-risk or high-risk moms. And so that's also a good resource for them.
The question is, what are the possibilities of expanding the treatment court program to allow the admission of high need and low risk populations?
High risk but low need.
High need but low risk.
Oh, I'm sorry, high need but low risk. Probably slim. Because if you are high need and low risk, what that communicates to me is that you should stay away from high risk individuals, because that criminogenic risk of criminal action is contagious. That's why you don't want a low risk person in jail or a low risk person in prison. It's because they will catch it, and you don't want that. And they need the resources accessed in the community now through the court system. So I'd be fearful for them sitting on the bench out in the courtroom, sitting next to somebody who, you know, is a very high risk criminogenic person. I think we're out of time. Thank you, everybody.